As the Ethiopians prepared for their attack, Ras Mulugeta moved toward Amba Aradam, where he was ordered to prevent any further advance by the Italians. As he made his way there, his army pillaged villages and conscripted villagers into his army. Once he reached Amba Aradam, he entrenched his forces on a 9,000 feet high mountain. He had chosen his position well, for his men had been able to take shelter in the mountains and caves, and were protected from aerial attack. They also were constantly supplied with food along with water from 5 springs in the area. Ras Kassa and Ras Seyum were also making progress, managing to join forces. They eventually reached a pass at Amba Alagi, where they set up their base of operations. Out of all the Ethiopian commanders, Ras Imru probably had the most success. Reinforced by Ayalu Biru, Imru managed to find the Takazi River, though his forces were spotted by an Italian patrol who warned the rest of the Italians stationed at Mai Timchet about the impending attack. The Italians then headed to Dembuguina Pass so that they could retreat to Adwa and Sela Klaka. Unfortunately for them, Imru cut them off, managing to ambush them. During this ambush, they tried to use tanks to break out, but this did little. The Ethiopians swarmed the tanks, killing the drivers. The Askaris also attempted to break the trap with a bayonet charge, but this failed too. At the end of the battle, half of the Italians were either dead, dying, or wounded. This was a clear victory for the Ethiopians. To make things even better, Imru's troops managed to capture 50 machine guns, weapons badly needed in their arsenal. Meanwhile, on the international stage, debates on how to deal with Mussolini's government continued within the League. Many wanted to pass more sanctions and embargoes, as exports of oil, copper, scrap steel, and scrap iron had increased from countries like America to Italy. Even though the U.S. government opposed exporting materials to Italy, it expected the League to stop its own companies from doing business instead of doing that itself. While the League debated on what to do next, the oil embargo continued to be discussed, and Italy continued to bomb Red Cross hospitals and tents. For example, when Italy bombed Desi, they attacked Red Cross buildings along with civilians indiscriminately. During the attack, Selassie was actually in the town, defiantly firing one of the Oerlikon .37 anti-aircraft guns, though this had little effect. Events like these further backed up their arguments. However, many still feared Italy would lash out with military force, once again thanks to Mussolini's bluffs. Therefore, an oil embargo went nowhere. Instead, the British and French decided that they would try to appease Mussolini with another compromise. The compromise would be known as the Hoare-Laval Plan. This would give Ethiopia the city of Asaba and the right to maintain its church in the city of Askum, at the expense of Tigray and parts of Ogaden, which amounted to half of its territory. Also, Ethiopia couldn't link a railroad to Asab. This failed, and the outrage to this plan came in the form of more protests. As this was happening, Italy began to start using more brutal tactics in response to their setbacks in Ethiopia. It was around this time that Italian forces began detaining prisoners in concentration camps. These concentration camps included Nakra and Anang. When prisoners were captured, they would often be sent from one temporary camp to another until they reached their final destinations. Italian forces would also resort to chemical warfare to attack the Ethiopians. In one instance, the Italian Air Force dropped a liquid that caused blisters which formed on the skin of Imru's troops who were splashed by it. This happened while Imru was moving to take Sela Klaka. When Imru saw what was happening, he was horrified. Italian propaganda tried to justify these crimes by saying they were retribution for the death and supposed torture by the Ethiopians of Lieutenant Tito Menidi after he crash-landed his plane. The Ethiopians claimed that Menidi had been captured by local nomads who tortured him to death. The Italians claimed that Menidi was captured by the Ethiopians, who was similarly tortured by being castrated and beheaded. What actually happened remains a mystery and will probably not be known, though the body was found a few hundred meters away from the plane. Nonetheless, Tito became a martyr, and Graziani used the event as justification for the bombing of Red Cross tents and civilians. saying that it was to avenge his death. And with that in mind, he bombed Desi, Sasi Bana, Bulail, and Dagahabur. Meanwhile, Ras Desta had his army of 15,000 men on the move from Ganale toward Dolo. His plan was to attack Italian Somaliland. However, the Italians managed to intercept wireless messages and revealing his plans. Graziani then moved to intercept Desta, and after he spotted Desta through aerial reconnaissance, he bombed Desta's army. This bombing once again proved effective and combined with starvation and disease, reduced Desta's army to 5,000 men. Planes that came along with Graziani's army also dropped gas onto Desta's army. And to make matters worse, Desta's forces were unable to access wells thanks to the Italians' efforts to keep them away. The Italians also caused confusion within Ethiopian ranks by sending out false orders on radio. Then Graziani finished off Desta on the 12th of January and the Battle of Ganale, Doria. It started with a bombardment of Ethiopian soldiers, when then, in the span of 3 days, tanks, Dubats, who were Somali soldiers, armored cars, and Eritrean units relentlessly attacked the Ethiopians until they retreated. Once the Ethiopians retreated, a slaughter ensued. Many Ethiopians ran to the wells as they were dying of thirst. As this happened, they were gunned down by machine gun fire. During the battle, the Ethiopians lost 4,000 men. After the battle, the Butcher of Fizan proceeded to bomb the town of Ganale out of existence. Defeated, Desta and what remained of his army retreated to Ergulim. While Graziani was busy dealing with the Ethiopians near Somaliland, Badoglio was stationed at Enderta. Here, he oversaw the construction of roads to secure supply lines and reinforcements. While he was at Enderta, he had planes bomb Mulugeta's positions. This killed animals which fed the Ethiopians. But other than that, this caused very little damage. Because of his inactivity, Mussolini continued to egg him on to do something about Mulugeta. When it came to action, Mulugeta wasn't much better, for he was content to stay in the relative safety of his mountain. Unlike Mulugeta and Badoglio, however, Ras Kassa and Seyum were making much better use of their time. They were moving through the province of Tembien. Their plan was to capture the passes at Wairu and then split the Italian forces in two. They also planned to allow Imru to attack Eritrea after they cut off Badoglio's supply line at Mekelle. Unfortunately, there were a few obstacles in the way. First was the Italian air superiority, which could severely hinder their moves. The second was that they couldn't contact Imru quickly to tell him their plan. This had to be done by messenger, which took days to reach Imru. Meanwhile, Badoglio realized that Kassa and Seyum were an enormous threat to him. So he sent a Blackshirt division to attack the left flank of Kassa's army. He then sent the 2nd Eritrean division to attack Kassa's right flank. To prevent Mulugeta from sending men to reinforce Kassa, Badoglio sent the 3rd Army Corps to Nabri and Nagata. Fortunately for Badoglio, he wouldn't have to worry about Mulugeta, as he had no intentions of sending Kassa reinforcements. For a day, the Italians held the line, but the next day they fucked up. Advancing with 4 battalions and 3 Blackshirt legions, General Filippo Diamanti overextended his lines. The Ethiopians exploited this weakness and counterattacked, costing the Blackshirts 335 men and casualties. After using the sheer might of their numbers to overwhelm the enemy, the Blackshirts were surrounded. As Kassa overwhelmed the Italians, he knew he could only keep up the attack for so long. He asked for reinforcements from Mulugeta, but Mulugeta wouldn't send any at this vital moment. Nonetheless, this change in fortune scared Badoglio, who began to panic and prepare for retreat. Unlike Kassa, Badoglio received more troops, though the nail in the coffin was the use of poison gas once again. This forced Kassa to retreat, ending the battle. As the use of gas increased, gas masks for the Ethiopians had been asked for. These requests to the Red Cross, however, were rejected by the Committee of the Red Cross. The rationale behind this was that the use of the gas masks wasn't clear enough, though the use was kinda obvious. Those who were sympathetic were forced to make their own gas masks or to tell the soldiers to breathe through cloth they peed on. Outrage also continued to grow over Italian war crimes. This outrage once again would not stop the continued advance of Italian forces. Badoglio once again was preparing to attack, though it would be Mulugeta this time. For his attack, his force consisted of 280 field artillery pieces, 7 divisions, and 170 planes. His plan was to surround the mountain and attack from behind. The Battle of Enderta began with an artillery and aerial bombardment for a few days. Then, on February 13th, the Italians ceased for a short time due to rain. One of Mulugeta's commander, McKenna, realized that they wouldn't be able to retreat if surrounded, so he took 4,000 soldiers to buy time for Mulugeta's retreat. Even after McKenna died, his men fought on, and they managed to create an opening for Mulugeta's army. Unfortunately, Mulugeta did not take advantage of this and only retreated when the Italians came up the mountain. His retreat was disorderly, and the battle cost his army 6,000 to 8,000 men and casualties. The Italians had only lost 621 regular Italian infantry, 145 askaris, and 36 officers, if we are to believe official numbers. As the Ethiopians retreated, Italian planes continued to drop gas on them. After Mulugeta's army linked up with Ras Desta at Maichu, he began marching to Coram. There, they hoped to join up with an army led by the emperor. While marching to Coram, Mulugeta was shot by either Oromo or planes. Imru, on the other hand, was having much more success. He had been conducting raids on the enemy, often going behind their lines to cause more chaos. In one raid, he killed animals that were used to feed Italian soldiers along the Marab River. In another, he attacked Fort Rama at night, and he caused significant casualties to the Italians. He also managed to steal valuable supplies, such as rifles, uniforms, food, and machine guns. A third raid was also taken by Imru, in which he attacked a convoy, stealing away valuable ammunition. These types of raids were effective and raised the ire of the Italian commanders. In the meantime, Kassa and Seyum were stationed at Amba Wark, which was another mountain. Even though Selassie had ordered both to retreat, they stayed. Then, on February 27th, a sneak attack against the Ethiopians on the mountain forced them to retreat and lose their position. When this happened, Kassa and many of his men were surrounded as they were left behind during the retreat. He and his remaining men fought on until night, when they retreated, getting harassed by air attacks. Seyum, meanwhile, had nearly driven back the Italians, but was once again forced to retreat because of bombing attacks. He then retreated across the Tekeze River, but harassed by enemy aircraft. Both Kassa and Seyum then joined Selassie's forces at Coram, where he was preparing to attack Badoglio's camp at Maichu. The last phase of the war was about to begin. If you want to stay tuned for the last part of this series, subscribe and leave a like.